So the first lesson is, I think you should have clear goals. And when I think about congenital hand surgery, I divide it into these three for all the conditions. The first thing is to enhance function, and this can be a factor based on the length, span, power, whatever the child is lacking. The second thing is to improve appearance. As much as it's functional, it's also cosmetic, and maybe you can even argue it's social function. And then we are here to facilitate and guide growth. So if you look at the X-ray on the right of the screen, this is how this child functions and looks, and I don't think any surgeon can make this better. So I leave it alone. And so there are clear strategies for surgical treatment of polydactyly, but I think the strategy should be based on these three goals, and some children need more of one and maybe less of the other. The second lesson that I've learned from my fellowship mentor, Jill Smith, was to excise nubbins. The main problem with nubbins is not a functional one, but it's an appearance issue, because when you ligate them, as I used to do before, you end up with this little mound of tissue on the radial side of the hand, which is cosmetically not very pleasing. I've seen one of these patients, when they're in their 30s, and it doesn't look nice because that grows as well. So I learned from Jill how to do this. I'm not going to go into the details, but you really need to have a setup, nursing support, and a way of administrating local anesthesia to a very small child. And once they cross about 4 months of age, I think it's very difficult to do this under local anesthetic, and I'll put them under GA when they're a bit older. The third lesson I've learned is that stability is key when you're doing a resection, reconstruction, because when you have instability, that just propagates and you end up with a progressive deformity as the child grows. And I find that in a type 4 duplication, I don't really think there's really a strong collateral ligament that you can repair after you've removed the facet, things like that. So I look for the abductor pollicis brevis and I repair it on the radial dorsal side of the proximal phalanx. It gives me a dynamic stability and it helps with abduction and pronation. I learned this from Taki, who's in the audience today, when you have to be careful of the so-called type 2B polydactyly, where there is synchondrosis on one of the parts that you're removing. And if you remove excessive amount of bone, you might end up with instability there. And so he recommended leaving a bit of bone, and this is what I learned from him, and I did on one of my patients. And then you can follow that up with an osteotomy if you need to get further straightening. The other thing that I learned from him is sometimes you have ulnar-sided instability at the MP joint for the thumb that you're retaining. And in this case, rerouting the APB to the ulnar side might be more helpful. The fourth lesson is to set the framework for growth. And I think this really depends on the skeletal alignment. So if there is a complex deformity, I would readily do a closing wedge osteotomy, leaving one side of the periosteum intact. This is like a hinge so that it just collapses in once you squeeze it down. These bones are soft and you pin it. But the other thing is sometimes you need double level osteotomies, and I will try to avoid doing shortening by closing wedge at both levels. On one of them, I would do an opening wedge using a donut of bone, maybe from the part that I've removed, the duplicate part that I've removed. The fifth thing that comes after this is addressing deforming forces. So we know that the tendons split, the FPL and the EPL. And so I think augmenting them to build up the one that you're retaining is important. Realigning them is important. But the prerequisite to that is you must have a well-aligned skeleton to go on to this step. So these are some schematics of how an FPL tendon relocation can be done. And this is an algorithm which guides based on the angles that you see at the MP and the IP joint. The sixth point is that you should obsess about aesthetics, because these children generally function well even if you don't remove the additional supernumerary thumb. I really think about the incisions, how I maintain the glabrous and the non-glabrous junction, the color transition, especially in our part of the world where you have dark skin on the dorsum, and avoiding and then planning which surface the incision should sit on. Our colleagues from the Singapore General have shown that there are some predictive factors that predict poor satisfaction scores among parents and older children. So I think when you have a problem of bulk and girth, borrowing tissue from the radial side, like a neurovascular flap, is helpful. Doing a vertical osteotomy or a chondroplasty to flatten that bony prominence might reduce the bulk and girth of the thumb. Seventh lesson is I reserve a recombination for special situations. By definition, a recombination means you're bringing together nail, pulp, and bone. And there are many ways of doing this. There was a paper that I would strongly recommend that you read where they did a matched comparison of a Bilho type reconstruction with the resection reconstruction. They found that the only slight advantage was it was more stable because you're not really going through the ligamentous side of things, but it's not very strong. In terms of motion, it's about the same. In terms of technical difficulty, it is very difficult and it doesn't look good at all. So I think you would try to tailor a recombination when you really need one. This is something that I did with Willion in Cambodia earlier this year. We used osteonicocutaneous flap to build up, but you're not going into the bone so that you're not destabilizing the interphalangeal joint. And the resulting cosmetic outcome is good. Sometimes you need to do more challenging things like vertical recombinations because the proximal part of the thumb might be good, but the distal part is not so good. Alphonsus and I have got a child with bilateral of such a case. We'll let you know at the next AP how it turns out, but it should be an interesting case to do. The last lesson that I want to share is to look out for concomitant hypoplasia. The first thing that we see in a child with polydactyly is the extra thumb. And then you often overlook the other subtle features like the hypoplasia. It's been reported on increasingly now, and I think Willion even talked about the embryological basis of how these can coexist. So this is a child that I saw for a slightly different problem. He presented with an infection from a CMO fracture. But when I looked at, and he had a polydactyly surgery done about 11 years ago, I realized that he showed all the features of hypoplasia. You can see that the web is narrowed. He doesn't have good creases. He's got a prominent squared off base indicating aplasia or thinner hypoplasia. But at this stage, he had functioned quite well, so we didn't do anything. But you might want to think about additional options like web space deepening and so on if you see them. So the message is to look out for hypoplasia and follow them up a bit longer just to see how they develop over time. So these are my learning points, and I'll stop there. Thank you.